Good day everyone, my name is Miriam. The topic for today is about Malolos Constitution. So, what do you think why we need to discuss or tackle about the Malolos Constitution? We need to tackle this because this is the first important Filipino document ever produced by the people representative. It created a Filipino state whose government was popular, representative, and responsible with the three distinct branches: the executive, the legislative, and last is the judicial. The political constitution of 1899, or known as Malolos Constitution, it was written by Felipe Calderon and Felipe Buencamino as an alternative to pair of proposal to the Malolos Congress by Apolinario Mabini and Pedro Paterno. The Malolos Congress was elected, which selected a commission to draw up a draft constitution on September 17, 1898, which was composed of wealthy and educated men. Came up with the political constitution of 1899, written in Spanish, approved by Congress on November 29, 1898, and promulgated by Aguinaldo on January 21, 1899. The Constitution has 39 articles divided into 14 titles, with 8 articles of transitory provisions and a final addition article. Patterned after the Spanish Constitution of 1812, with influences from the Charter of Belgium, Mexico, Brazil, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, and Guatemala, and the French Constitution of 1793. According to Felipe Calderon, man author of Constitution, these countries were studied because they shared similar social, political, ethnological, and governance conditions with the Philippines. Also influenced by the Cartilla and the Sangguniang Hukuman, the Charter of Laws and Moral of the Katipunan written by Emilio Jacinto in 1896. The Biak na Bato Constitution of 1897, planned by Isabelo Artacho, Mabini's Constitutional Program of the Philippine Republic of 1898, the Provisional Constitution of Mariano Ponce in 1898 that followed the Spanish constitutions, and the Autonomy Project of Paterno in 1898. A representative of the Filipino people lawfully convened in order to establish justice, provide for common defense, promote the general welfare, and ensure the benefits of liberty, imploring the aid of the sovereign legislator of the universe for the attainment of these ends, have voted, decreed, and sanctioned the following political constitution. Title 4 has 27 articles, which detail the natural rights and popular sovereignty of Filipinos, the enumeration of which does not imply the prohibition of any other rights that expressly stated. Title 3, Article 5, declares that the state recognizes the freedom and equality of all beliefs, as well as the separation of church and state. Title 2, Article, the form of government is to popular representative, alternative, and responsible, and shall exercise 3 distinct powers: legislative, executive, and judicial.
Good day everyone, my name is Giovanni Kanki and I was assigned to discuss about the legislative power and the executive power, where the executive power is part of the non-legislative power. So first, the legislative power. The legislative power vested a unicameral body called the Assembly of Representative members of which are elected for terms of years. So the group who hold the legislative power are the House of Senate or the Congress, because the Congress have an ability to pass law in areas of national policy, and also the Congress are more powerful than the President. So these are the legislative power can do. First, makes o law. Second, declare war. Third, regulate interstate and foreign commerce. And control taxing and last, spending policy. Next, we will tackle about the non-legislative power. The non-legislative power are power to Congress that have nothing to do with lawmaking but still have to do done by Congress. These are the non-legislative power can do. So first is the electoral duties. So what is electoral duties? So electoral duties, which means that if there's no presidential candidate receive a majority of electoral votes, the House of Representative must vote for president. Second is the impeachment proceeding. Only the House of Representatives can impeach. Only the Senate can hold the impeachment trial. So the last part of non-legislative power is the executive power. So executive power vested in the president and elected by the constituent assembly of representative and special representative. So the executive power is also part of non-legislative power the because it has the power to confirm any appointee and made by the president.
Good day. My task is to present the Commonwealth Constitution in 1935. The Commonwealth was designed as a transitional administration in preparation for the country's full achievement of independence. The 1935 Constitution provided a unicameral National Assembly and President was elected to serve 6-year term without re-election. So during the 1935, the Commonwealth was designed for the Filipino or for our nation to have and be independent against colonies. They provided the Constitution with its presidential term with 6 years, where the one that was elected will be the leader to design, to operate, to lead, and to serve people towards independence. After the Treaty of Paris in 1898, Philippines was subject to the power of the United States of America, effectively the new colonizers of the country. So, after the Treaty of Paris in 1898, which was British-American War, United States of America came into Philippines and began to colonize the country. During that period of time, Filipino fought over America to won against the colonizers. 1891 to 1901, Philippines was placed under military government with an until civil government would be put in place. In this period, after a civil government served in a place or lead in the Congress, re- through reaching the independence, military government runs as they govern Philippines to fight the colonizers. The civil government was amended to short term of presidency and permit to re-election for one term. Two acts of the United States Congress were passed that may be considered to have qualities of constitutionality. First is the Organic Act of 1902, first organic law for the Philippine Islands that provide the creation of popularly elected Philippine Assembly. Organic Act it is an act of the United States Congress that establishes a territory of the United States and specifies how is it to be governed, or an agency that manages certain federal lands. In the absence of organic law, a territory is classified as unorganized. So, states that the Organic Act of 1902 is an act of the United States that was establishes how how to govern the nation or or the one territory or on how to manage certain lands. Organic Act is an act that emphasizes that one in territory has absence of organic law is classified as unorganized. It is unorganized through which Organic Act is the establishment creation of elected Philippine leader who will organize and lead Philippine nation. Philippine Autonomy Act of 1916, commonly known as Jones Law, which modified the structure of the Philippine government through the removal of the Philippine Commission, replacing it with Senate that served as a upper house and its members voted by the Filipino voters. The first truly elected natural legislature explicitly declared the purpose of the United States to end the sovereignty over the Philippines and recognize the Philippine independence as soon as stable government can be established. Philippine Autonomy Act of 1916 was approved, posted under August historical events. On August 29, 1916, the Jones Law of or the Act of Congress known as Philippine Autonomy Act of 1916 was approved. It was the first formal and official declaration of the United States commitment to grant an, to grant independence to the Philippines. This is an act to declare the purpose of the people of the United States as the future political status of the people of the Philippine island and to provide a more autonomous government for those islands. The law provides that the grant of independence would come only as soon as stable government can be established, which give the United States government the power to determine when this stable government has been achieved. So, Philippine Autonomy Act or Jones Law is an act to declare the purpose of the United States or provides achieve the fully independence to the country. It states that an independence was granted as soon as stable government will lead, plan, and organize. That's why they establishes Philippine elected leaders to stable government and for the nation's independence. 1932. Many efforts of the Filipino independence mission led by Sergio Osmeña and Manuel Rojas, the United States Congress passed the Hair Hose Cutting Act with the promise of granting Filipinos independence, was opposed by the Senate President Manuel L. Quezon and consequently rejected by the Philippine Senate. So, the Hair Hose Cutting Act was approved on January 17, 1933 in the U.S. Congress, but it was passed by the U.S. Congress in December 1932 by the United States House Representative by President Herbert Hoover. It was the efforts of many Filipinos and the law that granting the promise of United States for the Philippine independence. It was the lead by the Filipino leaders Manuel Rojas and Sergio Osmeña who took efforts for the Philippine independence, but was opposed by the Senate through Manuel Quezon but rejected by the Philippine Senate. 1934, the Tidings-McDuffie Act, also known as the Philippine Independence Act, was passed by the United States Congress that provided authority and defined mechanism for the establishment of a formal constitution by a constitutional convention, members of which were elected and held their first meeting on July 30, 1934, with Carlo M. Recto unanimously elected as president. The Tidings-McDuffie Act, also called Philippine Commonwealth Act 1934, the U.S. statute that provide for the Philippine independence, to take effect on July 4, 1946 after a 10-year transitional period of Commonwealth government. The bill was signed by U.S. President Franklin D. Roosevelt on March 24, 1934 and was sent to the Philippine Senate for approval. Although the body had previously rejected the similar hair hose cutting act. So, the Tidings McDuffie in 1934 is an act to provide for the complete independence of the Philippine Islands, to provide for the adoption of a constitution and a form of government for the Philippine Islands and for other purposes.
My task is to report about the last part of the 1935 Constitution. The 1935 Constitution was written in 1934, approved and adopted by the Commonwealth of the Philippines 1935 to 1946, and later used by the Third Republic 1946 to 1972. It was written with an eye to meeting of the approval of the United States government as well, so as to ensure that US would live up to its promise to grant the Philippines independence and not to have a premise to hold onto its position on the ground that it was too politically immature and hence unready for full and real independence. Ang konstitusyon sa 1935 gisulat kaniadtong 1934 nga giaprubahan ug giadapt sa Commonwealth sa Pilipinas ug pagkahuman gigamit kining ikatulong republika 1946 to 1972. Gisulat kini uban sa panagtagbo sa pag-aproba sa gobyerno sa Estados Unidos aron matuman ug masiguro ang gibuhian sa Estados Unidos na panaad na ihatag ang independensya sa Pilipinas na hatag sa ilang tinuod nga kagawasan. Primary source, Preamble of the 1935 Constitution. The Filipino people imploring the aid of divine providence in order to establish a government that shall embody their ideals, conserve and develop their patrimony of the nation, promote the general welfare and secure themselves and their posterity of the blessing of independence under a regime of justice, liberty, and democracy, do ordain and promulgate the Constitution. Sumoto ang pasiuna sa 1935 Constitution nga ang katawhang Pilipino nga nagahangyo sa panabang sa balaang panghatag aron makatukod og usa ka gobyerno nga maglangkob sa ilang mga mithi, labanan ug mapauswag ang ilang patrimonya sa nasod. Gipasiugda ang kinatibuk-ang kaayuhan ug gisiguro ang ilang kaugalingon ug ang tanang tawo sa mga panalangin sa kagawasan sa ilalom sa usa ka regime sa hustisya, kagawasan ug demokrasya. Giorden ug gihayag ang Constitution. This constitution created the Commonwealth of the Philippines, an administrative body that governed the Philippines from 1935 to 1946. A transitional administration to prepare the country towards its full achievement of independence. It originally provided for a unicameral National Assembly with a president and vice president elected to a 6-year term without re-election. Kini nga konstitusyon nahimo sa Commonwealth nagbumala sa Pilipinas gikan sa 1935 hangtod 1946. Kini nga konstitusyon kay usa ka transitional administration aron maandam ang nasod padulong sa hingpit nga pagkabot sa kagawasan. Naghatag kini alang sa usa ka unicameral National Assembly nga adunay presidente ug vice-presidente nga napili hangtod sa 6 ka tuig nga termino na wala na dili na pag-re-elect. It was amended in 1940 to have a bicameral Congress composed of a Senate and a House of Representatives, as well as the creation of independent electoral commission, and limited the term of the office of the President and Vice President to 4 years with 1 re-election. Right of suffrage were originally afforded to male citizens of the Philippines who were 24 years of age or over and are able to read and write,
This was later on extended to women within 2 years after the adaptation of the Constitution. Gibag-o kaniadtong 1940 nga adunay usa ka bicameral nga kongreso nga gilangkuban sa usa ka senado ug usa ka House Representative ug pagmungna sa usa ka independente nga komisyon sa eleksyon ug gilimitahan ang termino sa katungdanan sa presidente ug vice-presidente sa 4 ka tuig nga usa ka re-election. Ang katungod sa pagbuto kay gihatag sa mga lalaki nga nagpuyo sa Pilipinas nga nag-edad 24 years o pataas na makahimo pagbasa ug pagsulat na naga-extend sa mga babay sa sulod sa 2 ka tuig pagkahuman sa pag-adapt sa Constitution. While the dominant influence in the Constitution was American, it also bears traces of Malolos Constitution, the German, Spanish, and Mexican Constitution, Constitution of several South Americans, and the unwritten English Constitution. The draft of the Constitution was approved by the Constitutional Convention on February 8, 1935, and ratified by the U.S. President Franklin B. Roosevelt on March 25, 1935. Election was held in September 1935 and Manuel L. Quezon was elected President of the Commonwealth. Samtang nagpatigbabaw ang impluwensya sa Constitution mao ang American Constitution nga ang ubang parte sa Constitution sa Malolos, German, Spanish, and Mexican o ang uban nga parte sa South American ug mga unwritten English nga Constitution. Ang draft sa Constitution nga giaprobahan kaniadtong February 8, 1935 ug aprobahan usab ni US President Franklin B. Roosevelt kaniadtong March 25, 1935. Ang pili ay gihimo kaniadtong September 1935 ug napili nga presidente sa Commonwealth mao nga si Manuel L. Quezon. The Commonwealth was briefly interrupted by the events of World War II, with the Japanese occupying the Philippines. Afterward, upon liberation, the Philippines was declared an independent republic on July 4, 1946. Ang Commonwealth nabalda sa mga panghitabo sa World War II nga gisakop sa Japanese pagkahuman, gideklara ang Pilipinas nga independente na republika kaniadtong July 4, 1946. So, I browsed the internet to add more information about the Constitution in the Philippines. The Philippines had long been used as a trading port in Asia, and this led their colonization by the Spanish and later by the Americans. The Spanish converted most of the population to Catholicism, and the religion remains the dominant one in the country. During the later part of more than 300 years of Spanish rule, nationalist sentiment began to grow among Indios, which was how the Spanish referred to the Filipinos, fueled in a large measure by the writings of national hero Jose Rizal, later executed by the Spanish authorities, and other ilustrados. A revolution was launched against Spain and the revolutionaries declared Philippine independence in Kawit, Cavite on June 12, 1898. What became known as the Malolos Congress was convened on September 15, 1898, and the first Philippine Constitution, called the Malolos Constitution, was approved on January 20, 1899. What is called the First Filipino Republic. In the Spanish-American War of 1898, the revolutionaries sided with the Americans, hoping that, with the defeat of Spain, independence would be granted by the U.S. to the Philippines. This, however, did not happen. After Spain ceded or sold the island to the United States in the Treaty of Paris, the U.S. immediately proceeded to brutally suppress the Philippine independence movement. So, I browsed the internet to add more information about the constitution in the Philippines. The Philippines had long been used as a trading port in Asia, and this led their colonization by the Spanish and later by the Americans. The Spanish converted most of the population to Catholicism, and the religion remains the dominant one in the country. During the later part of more than 300 years of Spanish rule, nationalist sentiment began to grow among Indios, which was how the Spanish referred to the Filipinos. Fueled in a large measure by the writings of national hero Jose Rizal, later executed by the Spanish authorities, and other ilustrados. A revolution was launched against Spain and the revolutionaries declared Philippine independence in Kawit, Cavite on June 12, 1898. What became known as the Malolos Congress was convened on September 15, 1898, and the first Philippine Constitution, called the Malolos Constitution, was approved on January 20, 1899. What is called the First Filipino Republic. In the Spanish-American War of 1898, the revolutionaries sided with the Americans, hoping that, with the defeat of Spain, independence would be granted by the U.S. to the Philippines. This, however, did not happen. After Spain ceded or sold the island to the United States in the Treaty of Paris, the U.S. immediately proceeded to brutally suppress the Philippine independence movement. In 1916, the U.S. passed the Jones Act, which specified that independence would only be granted upon the formation of a stable democratic government modeled on the American model, not the French model as the previous constitution had been. The U.S. approved a 10-year transition plan in 1934 and drafted a new constitution in 1935. World War II and the Japanese invasion on December 8, 1941, however, interrupted that plan. After heroic Filipino resistance against overwhelming odds finally ended with the fall of Bataan and Corregidor in 1942, a Japanese republic was established. In reality, a period of military rule by the Japanese Imperial Army. A new constitution was ratified in 1943 by the Filipino collaborators, who were called the Kapisanan sa Paglilingkod ng Bagong Pilipinas. An active guerrilla movement continued to resist the Japanese occupation. The Japanese forces were finally defeated by the Allies in 1944, and this sorry chapter came to a close. Philippine independence was eventually achieved on July 4, 1946. The 1935 Constitution, which featured a political system virtually identical to the American one, became operative. The system called for a president to be elected at large for a 4-year term subjected to one re-election, a bicameral Congress, and independent judiciary. So, history ra to siya about sa constitution sa Philippines. So, that's all. Thank you.